Okay, I'm with Carol Roth. Everybody, welcome back to Walk-ins. Welcome.
I'm so glad to be here. It has been a little while. I haven't had anything to promote, so I haven't been talking to anyone, but here I am.
You should be talking to more people though,
I
because
should.
I feel like you're the only person who has any insight into what's going on. We cover a lot of this stuff on Dumpster Fire as not experts, like tariffs specifically. We don't cover it. We are always like, we're not covering this because we don't understand it. But I don't know that anyone understands it, even people who have a better understanding than me. It seems like even all the smart people I know aren't exactly sure what the rhyme or reason is for a lot of these decisions. So, can you just kind of explain? I mean, is there a game theory to these tariffs?
Well, first of all, I'm going to say that not understanding tariffs has not stopped everybody and their brother to talking about them. So,
Yes. Well,
you got a lot of information out there. Um, so, I'm going to just take a step back and say that first of all, we have a really tough fiscal situation that was handed from the Biden administration to the Trump administration. And it was, even though there was a lot of optimism that you would get Trump in there to change the route of things, one of the things I had been saying is that there were these economic tripwires, or somebody called them booby traps when I said tripwires, which is maybe a better name around the economy, because we have debt to GDP that is completely unsustainable. We have north of 120% debt to GDP, which doesn't mean anything to the layperson. But basically, if we were an emerging market country, we would be in crisis. The only reason we're not in
mhm.
crisis is because we have the world's reserve currency and the world's trading currency. The IMF, the Treasury, a bunch of folks have said that it really becomes unwieldy at 70 to 80%. So if you think about that, we're about double what we should be in terms of debt to GDP. We also have deficit to GDP, which is the amount that the government has spent over what they take in quote unquote revenue, which is mostly taxes from us, which is at a wartime level. It's double the historic average, somewhere between 6 to 7%. And what's really unusual about that is usually in a time when we show quote unquote growth in the economy, that you would see a shrinking deficit because you bring in more revenue, and that means that you're not overspending quite as much, and it's usually about half that amount. What the Biden administration did when they went into their first recession, that everyone decided to not call a recession in the media, the two negative quarters of GDP, is that they decided that they were going to increase spending to paper over that. So we saw what looked like growth, but it was coming from deficit spending, which then again adds to our national debt.
What does
And
that mean?
so basically, as I said before, like when you take in a lot of money from the government, in terms of the budget, you would think that would shrink the deficit, that,
Yeah.
it's a given amount of spending. But what they did was, instead of doing that, they spent more money on top of taking in more money. So they took
Right.
in almost $5 trillion last year, which is the entire output, the GDP of every country. It's bigger than the GDP of every country in the world except for us and China. So they spent more than like Germany and Italy and any other country you could think of makes their entire economy in an entire year, and it wasn't enough. And so instead of letting that, shrink the deficit because they kept the spending constant, they spent more money. And so basically the deficit spending was driving growth. So that adds to our debts, that adds to our deficit to GDP. And what it does is, it also, because we have so much debt, especially now that we've been in a increasing interest rate environment vis-a-vis the last 15 years, it means that that debt is more expensive. So our interest expense, now the amount that we pay, not for anything new, but just like the interest on our credit card for stuff that we've already bought, is more than we're spending on defense. And you
Mhm.
cannot have a good country, a thriving country, when you're spending more to service your debt than you are on defense spending or some of these other categories. So I know we're going to get to tariffs, but I just want to kind of put this in sort of the backdrop, because that was the problem coming in, is that no matter what the Trump administration was going to do, there was always going to be some sort of a problem. If they cut the government spending, if they doged, right, and cut that
Mhm.
piece and kept the revenue constant, well, then, we could be in a situation where GDP shrank, because as I just said, that was a component of it, and they're not spending as much. So then you shrink the GDP, and then that could set off a whole series of issues that could actually end up with the blowing up of the deficit, increasing our interest expense, setting off a debt spiral and whatnot. So
What's
this
a
is the
debt spiral?
so the debt spiral is when you have your interest expense that is so high, right? And because you have now these deficits that you have to finance. You have to go out in the market, in the treasury, the bond market, and you have to buy bonds. And when you put more supply of bonds into the market, supply and demand, it basically decreases the value of those bonds, and that it increases the interest rate or the yield on those bonds, because now people are demanding more money, in order to basically say, okay, government, you can keep my money for a long period of time. So when that becomes then a higher interest rate, then that increases your interest expense, which means you increase the deficit, which means you have more financing, which increases the deficit, and you end up in this like cycle. And then
Mhm.
all of a sudden, at some point, that interest rate on the debt gets too high, the entire treasury market dysfunctions. Somebody has to come in, because either we're going to default or they're going to save it in some way, with one of the Fed programs, which we could get really wonky and get into. So this is a very serious problem, right? So
Hasn't this problem we watched this video in Dumpster Fire that, one of our editors made, and it goes back to it was called, like, Groundhog Day, and it goes back to I should send it to you. It goes back to maybe 96, where they're talking about our debt and then why we need to raise the debt ceiling, and then how they're like, "We're gonna be at, $4 trillion, and now we're at 36 trillion." So
yeah,
this is a problem that I feel like, has it ever been addressed, or has it just continuously gotten worse?
no, it's continuously gotten worse, because it's not just the hard number, the nominal value of the debt. It's what it is as the percentage of GDP. Because obviously, like, we could handle a different debt load than a different country. Or if we grew the economy, if all of a sudden we had a productivity miracle in nuclear energy and we exploded the GDP by double, well, then our debt load doesn't look as bad as it did before. So, it's all of this is relative. We can, as a country, handle a certain amount of debt financing, although, some folks would argue that's not a great thing. But, in a realistic situation, the problem is that there are no constraints. And
Mhm.
the people who are making the decisions, it's moral hazard. They don't bear the risks. They figure that, it hasn't happened yet, so let somebody else deal with it and it'll be their problem. And at the end of the day, they're serving their interests over doing what's right for the health of the country. And I think there's also just a lot of people in Congress, and I know this isn't a big leap, who are absolutely economically and financially illiterate, who probably have no idea what any of this means. I mean, I think you could ask some of them, what is money? What's the common definition? There's a three-test definition of money. And I would venture to say 98% of them couldn't give you that, yet they're in charge of coming up with how are we going to take in and spend trillions of dollars, which seems really insane to me. And it's
Yeah.
just a point of frustration for me, as somebody who explains this stuff, why, when we're talking about it in the media, so rarely is there sort of a financial and economic expert there to weigh in and be able to give you the actual issues, because all of these things are interrelated. All of these decisions are interrelated. And when you change one thing, something else has to counterbalance.
That was the
So,
crazy thing about this video, is that it was just the same people getting older.
right. We must do something. Now I have gray hair.
Yes.
We must do something. And it's always like somebody's got to do something, but the people who actually, have the ability to do it are the ones who are crying about it. So
And
it's,
Jaron was saying there's some famous quote that politics is just kicking down a decision until it becomes inevitable.
yeah.
Like it's you don't actually have
I
to
mean,
it's like you basically don't do anything until you're forced to.
I feel like it's human nature, right?
Yeah.
How many people want to be proactive on problems versus wait until the problem has gotten to the point where it's an emergency crisis or not fixable, and then they want to wake up and do it. And so that's, usually a predictor of success, whether you're willing to address the problems proactively or not. But yeah, and it's part of the reason why many of us advocate for small government, because the less they have to be able to do these kinds of things, the better off, because human nature is always going to lead you into that. Human nature is undefeated, Bridget. It really
Yes.
is. So back to the tariffs. So you have this administration coming in, they're contending with all of these issues. And so there was sort of this economic school of thought that perhaps the tariffs were meant to create this disruption, create a scenario maybe in the stock market where people would flee the stock market and invest in the bond market as a flight to safety. And maybe that would bring down interest rates and give them a little bit of room, which, kind of the opposite happened. And they had to talk their way out of that to normalize things. And that sort of didn't work. And so there's all these like machinations that maybe they're trying to get people to the table to do what's being called the Mar-a-Lago Accord, which is basically a rhyme to other accords like the Plaza Accord, where nations around the world get together and they agree to change financial values, whether it is something like, we're going to write up the value of your currency versus the dollar, or we're going to change the price of gold. That's something that, many of us have been talking about as maybe a tool that might be used. So there was kind of a thought that maybe this was meant as a way to kind of create cover to do these things. Although I would say there's probably an easier or simpler way. So that's one theory. When we get to kind of all of the other theories, there are so many different statements out there of why we need tariffs, and they all are in conflict with each other.
Right.
There are things that say, well, we're going to raise so much money from tariffs, we're going to get rid of the income tax. But at the same time, they're saying, well, we're just trying to get fair trade deals. So if you're
Right.
trying to get a fair trade deal and have everybody get rid of their tariffs, then obviously you wouldn't be making more money and getting rid of that. Or getting the extra money to get rid of the income tax. The same thing about reshoring manufacturing. If we're trying to get people to buy more in the USA, well, then you're not making a lot from tariffs. And so there are all these different things, and everyone's in a panic. And every time I talk to someone, well, what do you do? What do we need to do to solve the problem? And I'm like, well, what is the problem? There are kind of minor problems and some, mid-class problems. The biggest problem that we have in terms of manufacturing is that there are critical industries that we need to be focused on here in the US, like shipbuilding, like defense manufacturing, like pharmaceutical supply chains. So yes, we should be, figuring out a way to do that. I don't know that tariffs gets us there. It doesn't magically make manufacturing appear. You could do that via incentives, right? You could do that via a carrot versus a stick approach. But if that is your plan, if you want to make sure that we have these critical industries here, there are, all different ways you could do it. And you certainly don't need to drag in every other industry and put them out of business potentially in the process. If it's okay, well, we're in a war with China, well, then why is it that when you came out with Liberation Day, you said, okay, well, we're going to punish every other country? If you're a country that has basically moved your supply chain to another country, you're still getting hit with tariffs, not the China
Yeah.
levels, but whatnot. Then, there was, oh, but the middle class has been hollowed out and we need these jobs. And I'm not going to downplay that, there was a time when manufacturing was absolutely killed. And there are towns across this country that were decimated and really hurt by the shift in changing of the economy. But since that time, things have evolved. We have had manufacturing capacity on the upswing. We have hundreds of thousands of jobs, both in manufacturing and skilled trade, that we cannot fill. So it
Mm.
would seem to me that you'd want to incentivize training for the positions we do have instead of some sort of mythical, we need to bring back these mythical positions, which, by the way, are probably going to be taken by a robot anyway.
Yeah.
The whole thing just makes no sense. They have not done a good job in communicating this. They have not, you cannot say, well, what is the alternative when we do not have a clear objective? But what has happened, instead of the optimism that Trump had created from, hey, we're going to do deregulation, we're going to get the government out of the way, we're going to get a handle on prices, right? That was what everybody wanted, was price stability. We're going to make sure that the tax cuts are permanent. We're going to really create an opportunity for you to thrive. For a significant part of the economy, they've now actually created new barriers, lots of uncertainty that has butterfly effects throughout the entire economy. And so, given all of the things that we've talked about, the hair on fire debt problem, these tripwires, and so on, it's just a giant freaking head scratcher at best. And for those of us who have, clients, partners, places we shop that are effective, it is really, really frustrating. And I say this as a, somebody who is rooting for this administration. This is not
Right.
meant to say, oh, what a stupid thing that you voted for. I'm saying I don't understand why this is the way this is rolling out. And somebody's going to say, oh, well, what do you know, Carol? Have you ever done a deal before? Yes, I have done billions of dollars of transactions. I have a Wall Street background. I still do transactions. I've been negotiating for 30 years. And no, I'm not Donald Trump, but I have a pretty good idea of how things come together successfully.
Yeah, one of the things that was really interesting, even in some of the clips I saw, which is like we've been joking on Dumpster Fire that the doll talking point is just hilarious to us. But he, even in that one, the first clip that was widely viewed, he was talking about how it seemed to undermine his point even within that statement. So you can't say, China has all this power, we need to punish China, their factories are empty. Also, Americans don't need so much stuff. Like, you should be like, Americans want to buy all this stuff. China needs to get it together because they're just waiting to buy $10. But you are also promoting this weird austerity language that is crazy coming from uh somebody who is like as wealthy as Donald Trump is. I think there's a part of like the messenger that is problematic.
The golden age of America, where you all have $2 and 5 pencils. I mean, this is stuff that Bernie Sanders has said before, that we have all chided him for, that he's walked
Right.
through, a grocery store and said, well, you don't need to have 5 different choices of deodorant. And we all go, that's America. That's what we want. Who are you to say that? And so
Yeah.
now, because you have Donald Trump, who everybody loves in there, it's like, well, I think he's kind of right. Nobody really needs more than $2. And you're going, what are you talking about? And
And it's such a funny, he keeps repeating it. I don't understand the like, and I'm the same way. We were covering this on Dumpster Fire. I'm like, look, some of you might mistake my making fun of this man objectively for not making any sense and talking out of both sides of his mouth at the same time, which I understand can be part of a deal, but also it just doesn't make sense. And people are allowed to call this out, but our politics are just so tribal. It's infuriating. But I don't want him to fail. I
No.
don't I understand some of the defensiveness of MAGA because it is like the left would happily see this
Yes.
country burn and go into freaking debt, and they would be eating out of trash cans and being like, "Well, I was right about Donald Trump." That level
Right.
of desiring to be right about him is so dysfunctional. I understand why they are defensive of him and feel the need to like
Right.
circle the wagons and
Correct.
protect him
Right.
to
They
a
try
certain
try to
extent.
take this guy out figuratively and literally
Yeah.
every single time. So completely understand that.
Are you dealing with an HMO like I am? It's such a pain in the butt. If I want to get any sort of testing done to ensure I'm making my health a priority, I have to wait weeks for an appointment to see my doctor, then get a referral from her, and wait weeks more for an appointment with the specialist I needed to see just to get some lab work. Quest simplifies this process. I can purchase my own lab tests online and test for a multitude of health issues I might be concerned about, then take those results to my doctor better armed with the information I need. At questhealth.com, you can get hundreds of tests across several different categories, from allergies to heart health, hormones, sexual health, women's health tests for egg quantity, perimenopause, menopause, men's health tests for testosterone, prostate, and so much more. These are lab quality tests, the same ones you'd be given at your doctor's office. So prioritize your health and visit questhealth.com today. Use the code Phetasy to get 25% off and find answers to the multitude of health questions you may have. That's questhealth.com and use the code Phetasy for 25% off.
But on the other hand, why is it's funny too, we were making fun of this on Dumpster Fire. We're like, this is like a silent generation talking point. The doll market is huge, but it's also, we were like, our parents like, our kids playing with dolls on TikTok? Like, what's going on?
All right, so one of the weird things about me is I've actually been in the toy collectible and especially doll industry for a long time, including working in the industry for 20 years. So
How
I
did
can
you get into
actually
this?
So it's a very strange story, but when I was young, living in the Midwest, I had all of my toys that were lost in floods. Our basement would get
Oh.
flooded, and we lost all of our toys. And back in, I don't guess it was like the late 90s, maybe it was 2000, when eBay had just started becoming a thing. I had a friend who's like, "Oh, you got to check out this eBay thing. You can find anything." And I like think of the most random thing. And I had these little dolls that I loved. They were called the Glamour Gals. They were made by Kenner, who made those 3 3/4 inch Star Wars action figures. So this was like the fashion doll equivalent at 3 3/4. And I had these and I loved them. I'm like, I wonder if you could find some Glamour Gals. So I went on eBay and there they were. And I was like, oh my God. And so I actually was a collector. I became a toy collector, because of that. And then through that, bless you, um, because I am, a financial person, at that time, the markets for collectibles were very imperfect, and you could find them kind of offline and know what the prices were online and see the arbitrage. So I engaged in what I used to call barbitrage, Barbie arbitrage, and did like this, kind of market thing where I knew that the price was, X in one place and X in the other, and or Y in the other, and kind of made the difference. And then that led me into a business where I help companies with their fan bases and engage them and grow the companies through engaging and creating customer loyalty. And one of the companies that I've been in business with for 20 years is a toy company. They make collectible fashion dolls called Integrity Toys. And so what people don't understand, and also, by the way, for people who don't know my background, I'm a longtime small business advocate. I've been doing that also for several decades. I wrote The War on Small Business. I've been a top 100 small business influencer 5 years in a row. I've testified in front of Congress's House Small Business Committee. Like, I know, and I'm legit. I didn't just, by the way, like jump on this this
Yeah.
year. Like, I have a long history of standing up for small business because I come from a blue collar background, and I know the difference between Main Street and Wall Street, and think that it's important that we preserve for both. But anyway, at any rate, so what people don't understand about small business, and I'll do a show and tell with the doll, for example, is that just because you have part of your supply chain overseas does not make you not an American business. There's a
Right.
difference between Teimu, which is a Chinese company that sells their shirts really cheaply direct to American consumers because there are no American employees there. Your money, their revenues and profits all goes to China. But in a US based business, sure, they may source part of the product or all of the product for overseas, but they have designers that are based in the US. They have marketers that are based in the US. They have warehouse staff. They have operation, administration, photographers, other sorts of contractors they may use. They're lawyers. It supports a whole US ecosystem, and dollars for that company, whether they're sold to US consumers or in many cases to overseas consumers, come to the US, and that supports US jobs, that supports US revenue and profit. So when you have 35 million small businesses vis-a-vis about 20,000 big businesses, and just like, by the way, this is COVID 2.0, you're hearing, oh, well, you're a non-essential business because you have part of your supply chain in China, or, hey, we're going to give a favor to Apple and to, the chip manufacturers and these huge businesses while small businesses suffer all the same things that we hear in COVID. You start going, what is happening? Because
Yeah.
everybody has, basically switched. So I think one of the questions is, well, why wouldn't this company just manufacture in the United States? And I think it's a relevant question. The company I work with has been in China for 30 years. They have
Hmm.
partners and artisans for 30 years. So this is not a recent switch. It's because of the regulation, the labor force, and the energy costs here in the United States are prohibitive. If you could even find people to do this, you're not going to be able to create a product at a price that somebody else is willing to purchase. And when somebody says, oh, well, you're using slave labor. Okay, not every worker who works overseas is a slave laborer. Yes,
Right.
there are areas, the Uyghurs, horrible human rights violations. The industries that are in that area, which is mostly apparel, have really focused on supply chain to try to not run up against that. But not every person who works for a lower wage than is here in the United States, in dollar terms, by the way, is a slave laborer. And just because we have a difference in our currencies, when you go and you travel to another country and you can use dollars, you don't go, oh my God, I'm staying in the slave suite because I'm only paying a couple $100 for something that would normally cost me $3,000. Like,
Right.
we have an advantage here. And so we're taking, the comparative advantage and exploiting it. So let me just show you these dolls that we're talking about so you can see why this is never going to happen here in the United States.
Show
So
us
this,
on the doll where
where it
where
hurts. Okay.
tariffs hurt you.
Yeah. So this is Mothership Danya Zar. And this is such a cool doll because this whole little outfit here, this is all metal. This is a metal
Wow.
casing. And if you can see, it has like little rhinestones
Uh-huh.
here. She's got these robotic arms and hands that move. She has this incredible face paint, this multi-layered artisan face paint, and this crazy hairdo. She's got these incredible boots. If you can see,
Uh-huh.
the kind of stuff that if you were buying this yourself, you know, this is like couture stuff with
Yeah.
little feet. The jacket itself has kind of a sparkly fabric that has all of this hand sewing, and this is all done. This is a 1/6 scale doll. This is like a 12-inch doll. So all of this is done. It's very, very difficult to do. So yes, we could probably, in terms of the body, you could probably do the plastic injection here. No big deal. The way that this face is made is it's not a sticker, it's not a pad print. It's literally masks. They put a mask and they do a shape. And then they put another mask on it and they do another shape. This is probably 22 different masks that all go on, that if you mess up any one, the whole thing gets scratched and you have to start.
Wow.
So, and why do we not use technology? Because it's not there yet. It cannot get you to a premium product. this doll hair is all rooted in this insane machine by hand, very dangerous, and then individually hand styled and sprayed to look like that. All of this, fabric has to be sourced. All this has to be hand sewn. Same thing here. I mean, how many hours of work do you think goes into creating something like this? And if you have to pay people in the factory 20, 25, $30 an hour plus benefits, this is going to cost you $1,000.
Yeah.
You sale for $180, $85 probably for this.
What is the name of that brand?
So this is Integrity Toys.
Okay.
And there's many others. There's actually another manufacturer that makes bigger dolls, like ones that are like this size, named Robert Tonner, who has a beautiful explanation, same thing, that he would love to manufacture in America. But since the mid-90s, he's been working with the artisans in China because we don't have at scale that talent here. And if we do, nobody would purchase it. So there's a business opportunity that exists today. And this is replicated by millions of businesses, whether it's gadgets, whether it's in apparel, whether it's in dolls, which, by the way, people buy more than two of these. Collectors buy more than two of these a year. And,
how dare they?
You cannot tell me that it's a non-essential business, because
Yeah.
during COVID, we all agreed that that was bullshit. You can't say that. That's just unacceptable. It's un-American. That's what makes this country great, is that people can earn a living via comparative advantages. And so for the government, it's not like they said, hey, we're going to give you 2 years. We're going to help you set this up, and we're going to make sure that you can cost effectively manufacture it here. They just put an embargo. 145% tariff. It's not a tariff. It is an embargo. It is a prohibition. Nobody can pass that on to the customer. So now you have businesses all over the place that are just like, okay, well, I just have to wait. I can't do any business. I can't take in any cash flow. I can't do anything. I still have to pay all my overhead.
Yeah.
But I have no money coming in. And oh, by the way, I've been beaten up for the last 5 years because of COVID, supply chain, Biden inflation, whatever. And so this is what people aren't understanding about the tariffs. If it was surgically focused on the areas that matter, and we can say, okay, small businesses, we don't care about your dolls, you can go ahead and we'll reimburse you, whatever. It still has the same impact without hurting us. Or if they said, hey, we're not going to let the Teimus in, we're not going to let that money flow back to China, and not have any of it come to the US. Okay, but this is a situation where this benefits the US much more than it benefits China to have this company in business. And now the government is saying, sorry, you can't do business. And that's just completely unacceptable.
Yeah, it is. It's really, I mean, we're already seeing the trickle down effects after 5 years of like getting battered, and we're a small business, but we've had to give a lot of our advertisers deals on advertising because they called us and were like, hey, we're getting screwed right now on these tariffs. And people will yell at me and be like, well, they shouldn't have been producing in China. And you're like, what level of child are you that you don't understand that this stuff, like, we don't have the ability to do that. Even if we're going to scale up, it will take years, like you said, 2 years. We can't just magically create a factory to make this. It's a very weirdly like childish mentality, and I'm not sure if it's people. I don't understand it. It's that weird defensiveness that I get about the president, but it's not logical. Like it's like, look, I voted for the guy. I've been open about that.
Me too.
I'm not somebody who's out here going, I want him to fail so that I can be right, that he was always this. He's crazy enough that I was like, we were joking about this on Dumpster Fire, like the little guy might pull it off. He's crazy enough that sometimes his crazy stuff, but what, like the supply chain, I have friends who have parents in they're longshoremen, and they're like, it's always 3 to 6 months behind. Always.
Oh yeah, of course.
So
because
all of this stuff, Like we're feeling the effects of it already. And we haven't even started talking about AI, by the way. I've had 3 friends who have been laid off because of AI, and they're just freelance artists, but they're the first. This is the first, like, no one cares about the freelance artists, and you don't see it in the jobs. Like, you're not seeing it in the jobs reports because these people aren't on payrolls. They're just freelancers. And so I'm like, you guys don't even know the next evolution of bloodbath that's coming, and it is already happening in conjunction with this weird tariff thing. And even like the pencil doll talk, I'm like, this is like Great Depression talk, like it for some reason it's like I don't like it. I don't like these I don't like why the pencil and the doll has become this weird proxy. Why? Why the doll?
It's because a lot of those manufacturers have come out and spoken out against it, and because there's an identifiable issue with the holiday season, right? Q4
Mm.
is the biggest quarter of the year. Many companies, whether it be retailers or consumer goods, make their entire year in Q4, but that's happening right now. That's being manufactured now, and it'll be shipped, here probably next month to be able to get in ahead of the holidays. And so if something doesn't shift now, basically that's going to impact holiday. And so when we raise the alarm bell and say, hey, dolls and whatever, that's what sticks in his brain. So that becomes the talking point. But I want to go back to a few things. One, the creative thing is important because a lot of these industries are the creative industries, right? These are things where there is some artisan level of skill that needs to be done, that and everybody says, well, that's not essential. And again, it's none of your business. If somebody is putting food on the table, if they're employing people, if they're supporting their communities, they are in fact essential. And who are you to say that they are not essential? In terms of the voting thing, from the other side, we get a lot of people saying, oh, well, this is what you voted for. And this is not what we voted for. We were voting for price stability and deregulation and taxes and other things. We were voting for the border, which has been a huge success in terms of closing the border. A lot of things. This was not something we voted for. And that, I would just throw it back to any Biden voter who says that. Did you vote for the most historic inflation in 40 years? Did you vote for 8 figures worth of illegals to enter the country? We could say that's what you voted for.
Their
So that's
argument would be that he was open about wanting to do this.
No, well, he was not. He was open about tariffs, but he did tariffs in his first administration that were done more like you would normally see, more surgical, not broad-based, and not at embargo levels. This is unprecedented. At no time did he say we're going to shut everything down via putting on something under the guise of a tariff that acts as a prohibition. Nobody voted for that. Nobody thought that was what was going to happen, which is why you saw the market go into a free fall when that was unveiled, because everyone's like, what? This wasn't the plan. This is not a normal tariff strategy. It's not what he did in his first administration. So no, we did not vote for that. And then the other thing that's a really weird argument is that people keep going, well, yeah, China steals our IP and they have to pay. And we need to figure out something about that. But the answer is to not to shut down my business. It's a very weird thing for somebody who, by the way, usually is not involved at all, has no skin in the game, to say, but they're stealing your IP, therefore you should not be able to transact business. Like, how is that a solution? Just listen to yourselves, people. And that is, my other point of frustration is there's a lot of people who aren't understanding the impacts on the economy, who aren't personally affected, so they don't seem to care, and are making these ridiculous, but they're stealing our IP. Well, it's not your IP. It belongs to certain companies, and to tell those companies that the solution to their being a victim is to further victimize them is patently insane, no pun intended. So I feel like everybody needs to get a grip here, and it's important to speak out because Trump is not infallible. He is a human being. He has a certain base of knowledge. The more central planning that happens regardless of who is in power, the worse the outcomes are. We know that. So if you go back to 2020, his administration was the one that came up with 15 days to slow the spread. And even though the further machinations happened at the state and local level, he's the one that set that in place. He did not fire Fauci. He did not fire Birx. He is able to make mistakes. And so it's important for us when we see that he's doing something that we don't think makes sense, or maybe he doesn't have the right people around him to give that perspective. It's important to bring that up. That doesn't mean that you're not loyal to him. It means that you want to help him succeed, because by Lord, if this goes in the direction it's going and we don't start seeing some deals and we don't get small businesses on right footing soon, this will absolutely kill the midterms. This will kill Trump's legacy and could create all kinds of bad after effects. So let's make it be successful. And there are pivots that can be made from the current strategy, which he's already made pivots, so that wouldn't be unusual, that would make this more successful and keep in line with some of the million different objectives that have been put on the table. And I think it's important because had more people spoke up during COVID, we would have been out of that in a couple of weeks, and we wouldn't be dealing with any of the things that came after that. And I said that to you, Bridget, weeks and weeks ago, that this is a rhyme. This is COVID 2.0, and we cannot have the same type of outcome here.
It even sounds like it. Even whenever, it's like I always say, whenever a politician starts talking about the common good, like the hairs just go up on the back of my neck. And
As they should.
It's very frustrating to. I feel bad for a lot of the small businesses, just particularly that make stuff in a manufacturing, were really affected by COVID, because it was, even on our small level, we were like, oh, we're finally seeing, like, we were growing, we contracted massively, we survived. Like, people don't know what it's like. Last year for us was very much a make or break year. And again, we did not see the effects of the decisions of 2020, 2021 until really 2022, 2023.
Right.
2023 was very much like, okay, we're in triage, and we survived. There was a lot of optimism. People are still feeling optimistic, but I'm not sure these people are in touch with many small businesses. Small businesses are really, and now my big, like, tinfoil conspiracy is that these um these company, everybody just wants to put small businesses out of business. Like, I'm now convinced that this is just
Read the War on Small
nobody
Business.
actually. Does anybody care?
They don't. This is, as we're recording this, it's National Small Business Week. National Small Business Week exists so people in Washington could go, oh, small businesses are so important. I'm so for small business, and then put in place policies that crush small business. Nobody cares. It is insane. As I said, wrote the War on Small Business. The same kind of scenario happens, but how do you give Apple an exemption? Apple's buying back $100 billion worth of stock, and you give them an exemption. They're going to write this off at some point, saying, oh, these were tariff charges. Their valuation isn't going to change. Yeah, it may impact the cash on their balance sheet, but they already have tens of billions, and they're out raising, more debt. They don't care. It doesn't matter to them. For small businesses, they didn't have this 5 years ago before they were getting beaten up. They certainly don't have it now. It means that they may, go into personal debt. They may default on their debt. They may go out of business. And again, it's not one or two businesses. This is millions of businesses. 35 million. If you say 10% of them are impacted, that's 3.5 million business entities and
Yeah.
people who are impacting real jobs. And what happens is that when those jobs go away and those people don't have money, they can't go out and spend in other places. And it has a ripple effect through the economy. So it's not going to stay localized with them. I thought, again, we learned our lesson here in 2020. The same thing with the supply chains. They don't just, just snap your fingers and everything goes back to normal. This creates major disruptions and dislodges the whole flow of things at a time when we really, going back to where we started this discussion, we need growth right now. We have a debt to GDP problem. We need to unleash growth and grow the denominator, grow the GDP to get that debt to GDP ratio moving in the right direction. And they're doing the opposite. They're leaning into a strategy that could actually cause a major crisis, which again, maybe that's the intention here. Maybe this is the event for our financial reset, which I wrote about in You Will Own Nothing and is a real thing and is going to happen. But I feel like there is a kinder, gentler way that we could have done this that doesn't throw the baby or the baby doll out with the bathwater.
What is the thing that you wrote about in the Great Reset for people who didn't see that episode or haven't read that?
That basically we are on the precipice of a new financial world order. As I mentioned, our financial situation is abysmal. The country has done things that has created less confidence in the US dollar, including things like Biden administration freezing Russia's access to its reserves, when that war kicked off. So you've seen central banks around the world over the last decade plus selling off dollars. And what's interesting is that normally you would see another currency step into its place, but nobody really has the ability to step into its place. So the central banks have been going to a neutral reserve assets, one that is not manipulable by any or tied to any particular country, and that's been gold. And that's one of the reasons why, if you've been following me in our discussions with you, Bridget, I've been recommending gold since it's about half the price it is now. Now it's hovering in the $3,300, $3,400 an ounce range, and we've heard the Secretary of the Treasury say that he's looking to maybe monetize the balance sheet. And one of the only things that we have on our balance sheet is gold. So even though he's denied that's what he meant, there's a real possibility that gold could be written up or something else could happen that basically resets the financial stakes and basically, is the equivalent of writing down our debt, but at the expense of also killing our purchasing power and inflation and taking away the value that we've created, the stable value, through our work and our productivity. So it's going to be a really messy time. It was clear that this has been coming. And it seems more clear every day that we're getting pretty close. But, in history, close doesn't necessarily mean days. It could be 5 or 10 years, but it also could easily be this year.
Yeah. Have you dug into like the Doge stuff? Did they actually save any money? I still can't figure it out.
I also cannot figure it out. So they certainly have identified areas where there does appear to be abuse, where there appears to be fraud, where there appears to be money that should be reclaimed. But even if they kill off those programs, what I don't really understand is, if Congress has already appropriated that money to somewhere else, does that go away? Does that get reallocated somewhere else? Do we actually get to save it? What happens? So that I think is still a question mark. And as I've been saying, it needs to be done very carefully to the extent that it does go away, which is what we need for it, to happen, is for it to go away.
But didn't they just have they cut spending at all?
So we're still waiting for the big, beautiful bill that's going to, clarify all of that. But of course, they're not going to. And that's the sick joke of this whole thing, is there are things that the Trump administration can do. If they write up, the price of gold that right now they're holding it at some, insane amount. It's like, I think it's like $42 an ounce or something in that level. If they just wrote it up to where it was today, the machination of that is that amount gets deposited in the Treasury's bank account. So it's basically like printing money out of nowhere by an accounting trick. And that would give them more money. And depending on, again, on what they wrote it up to, it's one thing to write it up to where it is today, which probably gives you another $1 trillion. If they all came together in an accord and said, well, gold's going to be, $20,000 an ounce, that could give them multiple trillions of dollars. But as we know, we're spending like 7 trillion a year. So our deficit being 2 of that, that's only going to take you a couple years. And then what? So it gives us a path. We have these paths to get ourselves back on track. What we don't have is Congress's buy-in. What we don't have is a mechanism to rein in Congress, because there's no sense in going through all the machinations here, causing more inflation, causing more issues, because there has to be that counterbalancing release valve, and it's going to be via inflation. It's the most likely occurrence. To buy ourselves the ability to get back on track, if Congress is going to go, okay, great, now we can spend even more on this. And that's really the part that's disheartening to me, is I see the path to buy ourselves the time to fix it, but I don't see the path to be able for Congress to be reined in to fix it for the long term. And so, it's a little bit of a depressing situation there.
Yeah, the Doge thing is interesting because we were talking about this in the writers' room yesterday, just how $1 trillion is so much money. You can't really get your mind around it. And it's this
Right.
very strange paradox where you'll be like, they'll kind of joke and be like, oh, it's only $100 billion. What's the big deal? And then to Americans, you're like, well, we still should cut $100 billion. But then when I hear that Doge cut $150 billion, I'm like, that's like cutting out Starbucks when you're in foreclosure. Like, oh no, like you cut out Starbucks. It's good. You should do it. But it's really like, are we actually making a dent here in the debt?
It's our money in one way or another. It's either via tax dollars or via money that ends up being printed and devaluing, our productivity and the money that we have. So one way or another, it's our money. And so, yes, we should do it, and we shouldn't let people be enriched just by being in the government.
I agree.
It's terrible and disgusting. But yeah, we need a lot of those. We need like 20 of those. So that's the issue. But I mean, if you were able to do that in a bunch of places, and then on the entitlement side, the question becomes, is there fraud, waste, and abuse that can shrink those numbers, or do we need a restructure, or do we need both? Whatever it is. But it's tough because it's politically unpopular. Most people, again, are economically and financially illiterate. And so somebody would rather, and this goes back to things I talked about during COVID, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Build Back Better plans, all these things. American Rescue, I think, was the first one, where it's like, I'd rather have $1,000 than, take that and endure the 10,000 per year for the rest of my life inflation than not have the $1,000 and have everything be more affordable for my life. And I don't know, other than like sitting everybody down, they've just been indoctrinated for so long. How do you stop that? I mean, how many times did you hear me say, don't take the $1,000, don't take the $1,200. You're going to be paying, 5 figures a year for the rest of your life, which is exactly what happened. Even though, the administration said, oh no, there's going to be no inflation. It's going to be transitory, because that's maths. I mean, at the end of the day, math, you can't get around it. It just is what it is. And eventually you're going to get there. And so when somebody would rather focus on the nominal value of something than the real value of something, I don't know how you win that battle either. And there are too many corrupt politicians and idiots who don't know what they're talking about. They're going to go, no, I need my $1,000.
Yeah, and it's when Doge was talking about giving everybody $5,000, I was like, please don't. Shouldn't we be paying off our debt with that money?
But that's the perfect example of the bizarro world we're in, is that all the people who understood economics enough to knew it was a bad idea when Biden did it, think it's a great idea when Trump does it, and does these like mental gymnastics to try to come up with the reason why now all of a sudden, the same thing with price controls, the same thing with non-essential businesses, like just have some principles, people.
Yeah.
It's okay. He'll still like you.
I mean, he might not, but
But if you go back and you tell him that you're a big fan, he will. He's very forgiving. He may hold a little bit of a grudge in the middle, but he'll eventually like you again, as long as you tell him that you like him.
Yeah, I don't think that it should be based on that. Yeah, the I always is there any cause for optimism? What are you optimistic about anything at all, or are you internally panicking a little bit?
So I'm one of those people. I'm too smart for my own good, so that doesn't help with the coming up with the different scenarios. But I do think he has an incredibly intelligent person in his cabinet, in Scott Bessent, our U.S. Treasury Secretary, who I think really does know what's going on, and almost seems sometimes pained to have to go out and say things because he's on the team and he needs to just say them. But I think eventually his voice of sanity will hopefully win out. I think he is going to be creative and out of the box and hopefully come up with the path forward. I do think there is an opportunity for us to reshore certain important critical capabilities here. I think that there are a lot of opportunities that could be seized. But at the same time, there's always a counterbalancing measure. But you never win by betting against America. So you have to move forward with the cautious optimism. You have to understand, you have to hedge, you have to prepare for the worst, but you still have to move forward being optimistic. And you can't control the macro circumstances, but sometimes you can control your own situation. And in any sort of environment, there's always an opportunity. Now, that's not discounting the fact that when they tell you your business, isn't allowed to function anymore, that that's not okay, and we need to get away from the government being able to do that. But maybe there's something on the side that you can start that becomes something big too. So always look for the opportunities, because at the end of the day, everything's made up of individual micro outcomes, and you have more control over your own outcome than anything else.
Yeah, there's a lot of the people in our chat when we did our wildly unpopular dumpster fire talking about this. It's always funny. It's always my favorite ones too. Like, I had so much fun doing that one because I'm like,
Can
guys.
we call this one the Valley of the Dolls?
Yes, the Valley of the Dolls. I actually don't throw the baby doll out with the bathwater. It sounds like a book. Again, we live in a time of intense paradox. So when he said the kids will only have 2 dolls, I was like, thank God, because my kid gets so many toys, and we are just like, please, no toys, no more toys. She's good. I have to hide them and rotate them so that otherwise it's too chaotic. She's the only granddaughter. Like, the grandparents are away, so Amazon has made it so you can just send presents whenever you want, no special occasion. She thinks every box that comes here is for her. It's not good. We have to hide them, but they always want proof of life, show us
Right.
that she got this thing. So, and I get it. Like that I wouldn't want to take that, I've any parent, we all converse with one another and we're like, you can't take that from the grandparents. That's
Right.
being a grandparent.
Right. You've earned that.
So we
You've
were
earned the
kind of
ability to
like,
do that.
thank God. And we do have too much crap. We do buy too much crap. It is crappy quality. The quality of everything has gone down. And even in my
Except for
lifetime,
fashion dolls.
except for fashion dolls. But then on the other hand, I've been watching all of these, not on TikTok, but they have migrated over to all the other platforms, videos of the artisans in China doing their propaganda videos for China about how, they can like wait this out and there's no one in America who are truly artisans like they are, and they're not wrong. We don't have, not at scale, like you said. There's like
Sure.
a couple people who could do a doll like that, and it would take them a
Yeah, no,
year to make
there are
one
many
doll.
individual, yeah, there's very individual
Like
artists, and
Etsy
they do one
creators.
dolls, and they sell them, and their dolls go for $1,000, and you churn out one every few weeks, and they make themselves a nice life with that, and that's fine too. I think that's the whole point here, and it's like crazy in America that we have to discuss this. It's all about choice. It's
Mhm.
about you making the decisions. Even if you think people have too much crap, like that should be their decision. We don't cut them off from that. We give them the personal responsibility and we give them choices. They don't have to
Yep.
buy every product on the shelf, but they get to pick and choose what it is that they want. And doing that has made us very wealthy. I keep laughing. I mean, one of my favorite talking points is like that we're getting bullied. I mean, we have almost a $30 trillion GDP here, folks. We are the number one by far in the world. And then somebody's telling me that like we're getting beaten up because, we're running a trade deficit with Vietnam. Vietnam's, median income is something like $4,000 and ours is like $89,000. So like,
Right.
what do you think that we're sending them? Like, how are they, do you think the person making $4,000 is going to buy our GMC trucks? Like, I
Right.
don't fundamentally understand what it is that you think that we're being taken advantage. It's not to say that there aren't slights, but here's a perfect example. Okay. So imagine you're like a super wealthy person, right? And you have a house, a beautiful house, and there is a termite problem that's starting out. You also have a huge business opportunity that you could focus on. And when you were at the deli picking something up, the guy screwed you out of $15. So, where is it that you want to spend your time? Are you going to fix the termite problem that threatens your multi-million dollar house? Are you going to spend time focusing on this new opportunity that could bring you millions more of dollars? Or are you going to drive back to the deli and yell at the guy and try and get your 15 bucks? It's not to say that the 15 bucks isn't a slight and you were cheated out of it. It's just not a good use of your time. And that's where the United States is today. We have a hair on fire debt problem. We have lots of opportunities to grow. And we have some guy who cheated us out of 15 bucks at the deli, maybe, but he makes like, $7 an hour, whatever it is.
Right.
It's not saying that there isn't an issue. It's just not that important to us, folks. And
Yeah.
yes, there are important issues of like IP and whatnot, but there are other solutions to get there. And the thing that drives me crazy, Bridget, is that you have Donald Trump, who's like potentially one of the most charismatic individuals in the world, who has this beautiful club in Mar-a-Lago. Like, why not just throw a swanky party and invite a bunch of celebs and, ball players or whatever, and invite these people over and wine them and dine them and charm them? He could cut so many deals that way. He doesn't have to like blow everything up first. That's the weird thing. Like, if he didn't have those tools, you would say, okay, well, maybe I understand. Like, he could charm the pants off of them. He's a good negotiator one-on-one. So why wouldn't we just start there? It's
My editor
mad.
has a theory that he likes to become the hero of his own crisis.
Yes, we're very familiar with the arsonists who burn the house down and then stand with the bucket, right? The Fed's been that, the Biden administration was that. Seems to be a political thing that, oh my God, I can't believe the house is burned down that I threw the matches at. But here's a bucket, here's my bottled water.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I don't know, but it's one of the things that this administration and all administrations could benefit from is having a small business group, whether it's a council, an advisory group, more people with Main Street knowledge that are sitting at the table, because that group is not spending the $1 million on his reelection or on his inauguration or whatever it is. But it's a huge part of the economy. It's almost half the economy. It's the majority of open jobs. It's a huge thing. And when you have the tech bros who are great at what they do, but they're myopic, when you have the Wall Street people, they're a little sketchy. And I say this as a former Wall Street person, and they're myopic. Everyone's myopic. And you have like almost half the economy that just doesn't have a real voice and has never really thought about in the context. It impacts tech, and it impacts Wall Street, it impacts all of these other folks. So I think that would be, and by the way, the SBA is not this role. The SBA is about lending, and they have no power. So it would be really good. And for an administration that campaigned on being Main Street first, to have more of those voices at the table to really kind of say, well, here's what we need to be thinking about, because it is easy to just think about manufacturing and industrial and all of these things, but not figuring out how it goes down to the small business. And by the way, we're a 70% service-based economy anyway, so there's a lot of things that kind of, I think, are lost in the translation here.
And then just switching gears a little bit, tell me, I've been talking to a lot of, I don't really know how you prepare for any of this, but I was talking to a lot of the boomers in my life, because we have to have those uncomfortable conversations with them. Like, what are your plans? And I have a similar thing where we're like, we need to get a will. We have a kid now. All these
Yeah.
things. I have life insurance, but I don't know that it's all organized in the way that it should be. And I know that you have some experience with this, and even have we've talked like briefly about it on other podcasts, but it wasn't something that was, again, very myopic. I'm like, oh, I think I need this this thing that Carol talked about now.
So
like, it is really funny how you're like, I know in the back of my mind, I know someone who knows what to do about this problem that I just now have right now.
Yeah, so people never think about the aging of their parents, about emergencies, or about death until it impacts you. And at that point, it's often too late. So, one of the things I think is really important, and I'll tell you how I got there, is that you prepare your wishes and information and create an area where that is accessible by your loved ones if something should happen to you.
What do you mean,
So,
wishes and information? Like your wishes for what you want, where you
anything,
want to be
yeah, like
buried, or just
if you anything from, do you want to be kept alive? Do you want to have a do not resuscitate
okay.
um, scenario, or do you want to be kept alive? Do you want to be buried or cremated? Do what do you want to have happen to your money? Who are your beneficiaries? Where can you find the key to the safe deposit box? Where did you put your Bitcoin, key code? All those
Wallet, yeah.
kinds of things. I mean, what kind of bills need to be shut down? Like,
Is this
where
on paper or is it stored somewhere?
So I have two different form factors. So it's called futurefile.com. And we have two form factors. We have a kit, which basically comes with, and I don't think I have show and tell here, but it comes with a workbook, and it comes with an instruction manual, and it comes with a filing folder. So you can actually fill it out by hand and put things in the filing folder. And we also have a Windows-based software where you can type everything, and then when you're done, you can either put it in Dropbox, you can print out a copy and put it in a folder with other things. The instructions walk you through your different options, because some people trust their loved ones, and some people don't trust their loved ones, but still need to make it accessible. So there's different ways you can handle it. But basically, this came about because I think we've talked about this on previous podcasts, but I've had a lot of death in my life.
Yeah.
I lost a boyfriend in my senior year of college in a car accident. My mom passed away shortly after that from leukemia, the day after her 51st birthday. And then my stepmother passed away from lung cancer at 55. And so, we kind of went through all of these things, but my dad handled everything. And so my dad decided that if something were to happen to him, my sister and I wouldn't know what to do, where to find anything, like what's the next step, because particularly you're in a panic at that point in time. So he made us get this folder, and he would just like hand us stuff and put it in the file. And we kept calling it the death file, like as a joke. And then in 2013, May, actually, we're almost on the anniversary here as we're talking. My sister called me and said, Dad's been in a freak accident. I need you to get to the hospital and bring the file. And so the first thing that had happened, he was on blood thinners, and I guess he had just tapped his head getting into the car, bleeding on the brain, and had passed out in the car, and they found him like several hours later. So when we got to the hospital, they said, do you know what medicines your dad's taking? And I said, hold on. Yeah, he's taking this, and this. Do you know who his doctor is? Hold on. Yeah, his doctor's all these things. And then we had to make a decision for him to have surgery. And he had brain surgery, and it didn't do anything. And he was basically brain dead, but being kept alive by machines. And they said, do you want to take him off of life support? And in going through putting this file, not even joking, we had this conversation, and the conversation went like this. Hey, Dad, if this were to happen to you, what do you want? I want to be kept alive forever. Okay, seriously? You decide. No, that is not an option. I don't want to make this decision. So he was thoughtful about it. And then he said, okay, here's what I want to do. I want you to get 2 opinions. And if both of them say there's no chance that I will recover, my brain usage, then I want you to pull the plug. I said, okay. And we ended up in that exact scenario. Wow. And when I tell you, the biggest thing that this exercise did was not have my sister and I walk around with the burden of, did I make the right decision?
Right.
Because I know I followed his wishes in that particular scenario. And then in terms of the time, for me, time is like such a huge thing. I mean, hundreds of hours that I was saved because my dad was a hoarder and everything was, not a real hoarder, but like a borderline, and everything was a mess. So trying to find everything. And then it saved us more than $10,000 because, by the way, dying's super expensive if you want to be buried and have all of the different things. And he's like, I don't want the Cadillac of caskets. I just want this. Don't do a this and all these things.
Wow.
So when we told people about it, they're like, we need to do this. And so we took what my dad had created and we ended up creating this product. It's only $99, $99.99. It's a one-time fee. We didn't want to make it software as a service. If you do the software, it lives on your computer, not in the cloud. If you have the kit, you can hold on to it. I liked the kit because I like to have something to grab, and I didn't want to have to be futzing with my phone, but some people prefer the online thing, and that's fine. You have the choice.
I would just be worried about all that information online.
Right.
Anyway, it's just like, no matter how protected these things are.
You can split it. One of the things that we do, like in our kit, is that we say you can find this thing online here, and here's the password and whatnot. Right. But it's like, you kind of flip the pages. And what's nice is it tells you what to do. Like if you're in an emergency, you go here. If, you have an aging issue, you go here. If someone passes, you go here. And it just makes you get all of your affairs in order. And we don't take the place of any specific thing. Like there's no will in there, but it tells you that you need to go get a will. It tells you what to do with the person. And then it tells you to file it, because if you have a will and no one can find it, which happened, by the way, to Aretha Franklin and ended up in the courts for like 5 years, that doesn't do you any good either. So you want the people to find your information. You want them to know who they can call. And it's just a really critically important thing that we do. Is really a mission-based business just to make sure people are prepared. So that's at futurefile.com. But even if you don't want to get it, you should still get your stuff together and put it in a place that somebody can access in the case of an emergency or a passing.
I like the idea of the workbook. I mean, I want to get I've had this conversation with so many of the people that I love in my life, and I want to just go with this workbook to them and be like, "Here, please
Yeah,
fill this out. I don't care who you give it to. It doesn't need to be me. Like it's a
sure.
good gift, just here's the
It is, and it's a good family meeting tool too, because there are certain things that impact the whole family, and not everyone has this family relationship. But like, if you have a family that wants to be buried and you all want to be buried together, like you all need to decide like how's that happening, and do we need to get our plots,
yeah.
and who's paying for what, and it's you can't wait for someone to pass away and then everyone be arguing, and that's what happens when people don't do this in advance. You take the most stressful time
Yeah.
of your life, and then everybody's heightened and not thinking
Yeah,
clearly,
you're
and then
in
you have to make
grief.
these big decisions and people stop talking to each other. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really emotionally stressful. So we want to make sure that you already have a bad thing going on. We're also using it for my father-in-law. My father-in-law is about 94, and he's in memory care, and so
Mm,
he's got Alzheimer's. He can't do anything, and so we need to have this for the just dealing with his bills and
yeah.
all the care issues, and then eventually we'll have to use it on the other side. But the aging issue is such a huge thing for our generation too, because so many people have to take care of aging parents.
Yeah. The oh yeah, my friend Lori wrote a book that after her father died, Dead People
Lori
Suck.
Kilmartin.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great book. Yeah.
Yeah, it's helpful. I mean, it's actually quite practical, but it
Yeah.
doesn't have, it doesn't it's more like here's what happens, what all the stuff you don't think about
Yeah.
that you need to think about. And
Yep.
but I feel like this is the kind of stuff that like haunts me. It like keeps me up at night because I don't want to be scrambling. There are people who have their affairs in order, but then and usually you just get a call from a lawyer and they're like, "Here you go. Here's all of their wishes." But I've talked to so many widows. My dad was like, "We know so many widows now because men don't live as long." And it was interesting talking to my aunt. She's like, "Just no," she was like, it gave her clarity on what she needed to take care of. She's like, dealing with the fucking like bridge toll pass that they had and trying to shut that account down. She was like, it was a nightmare because nobody knew what it was under, where the account was coming from. We were trying to close all of his accounts. And it's just like little things like that you
Oh, I
don't
know.
want to be dealing with in the aftermath. And it's what you end up dealing with.
We actually sell some of these to financial advisors who give them to their clients. And we had a story from one that said that, he had a very high net worth family, and he dealt primarily with the husband. And when the husband, passed away unexpectedly, the wife called and said, okay, so who's our estate planning attorney? Like, where do I find the will? And the financial planner's like, I have no idea. And he felt so terrible because he's running all this money, but that's not his purview.
Right.
So he wanted to make sure his clients, where he could say, oh, remember that kit that I gave you, that should be in section B, and you should be able to find all that information. Or if you do it online, you could actually, share a PDF copy with your financial planner if you wanted to. But like, what a horrible feeling that you're running like 8 figures for some family, and the guy passed away, and you have no idea what to tell the wife in terms of like what to do next. Like, it's just not ideal. It's not ideal. And there are so many things. The worst thing that happened with my dad, other than the whole death thing, is that is there was actually somebody who stole his credit card while he was incapacitated. Like, maybe somebody took it out of his wallet in the hospital or something and ran up a bunch of charges. And we had to go back to the credit card company and be like, he was in a coma. Like,
Oh my
he doesn't know how
God.
to use, this website. And he was not, yeah, I mean, it's just, people are horrible. And there are a lot of horrible things that you have to deal with. So
I'm sorry. I'm on the
Yeah.
anniversary or approaching the anniversary.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for your
But
loss.
it's a gift. Thank you, but it's, it's the he did this thing that we can spread to other people. So, I'm gonna
I'm
get you
gonna
a
buy
future
like 5
file.
of them.
And then everyone should get it. And by the way, you can't just get it, like you have to actually fill it out. Like it doesn't help to just get it and have it sit on your desk. So
No, I
call a
know.
family meeting or put a Sunday together and just sit down and do it and attack it because it is such a relief. In fact, we just re-updated our will and our future files about 4 months ago, and it was just a huge relief because things had changed and we wanted to shift things around. And it's the same thing. You like think about these things, but it's nice to have the freedom that you don't have to worry about that.
Do you recommend one per individual, or can
We
you
do.
do like a couple?
So we recommend per individual,
Okay.
just because there are things that are specific, in terms of maybe your medication or your wishes or your passwords, that you don't want to be digging through stuff. But you can duplicate things. If you have a page, you can copy it. You can type it out and put it in both of them. You can kind of use it. It's just really meant to get you to get everything organized.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is your biggest defective character?
So, it always kind of depends on your internal or external perspective. But for my own self, sometimes it's that I have no poker face and no ability to be political anymore, which is probably a great thing from an external standpoint because I'm a trusted source and a truth teller. But boy, does it hurt when you're somebody who's, in the media or in a corporate boardroom and you're not willing to toe the party line. You're like, no, that's just not right.
Yeah.
People don't want to hear that. So I guess it's a defect on one side. It's not a defect on the other side.
Well, what's your biggest asset?
And again, depends externally or internally. But internally for me, it's that I know myself incredibly well. I know what works for me. I know what my moral code is. I know, what it is that's going to make me happy and what's not going to make me happy. And that allows me to live a very happy life and be a happy person. Because if you're constantly somebody who needs to please other people or do things for the story or because, you want to seem cool or whatever, like I'm at a point where I just don't care. And so that allows me to from an asset standpoint, like the things that really matter is to have a really good, happy day-to-day foundation.
I love that. Where can we find you?
So you can find me on X. If you can find me on X, it's harder every day. Carol J.S. Roth. I have a free economic newsletter if you want to learn about the things we're talking about at carolroth.com/news. I have books, You Will Own Nothing. We're on small business, The Entrepreneur Equation. I have dolls, and then future files at futurefile.com. And at some point, you'll just stumble into me somewhere.
It's always a pleasure. Somebody actually in the chat was thanking us for the introducing you to them.
Oh,
in the dumpster fire chat. You're gonna have to come do another segment for us.
Yeah, we need to come. We need to have a chat where we can be funnier. This was such a serious conversation, so we're out of character for us.
No, I mean it's important. It's good that I've been trying to get my mind around a lot of this stuff, and I don't understand finances. So I appreciate you coming and talking about it. I don't know if it's cost you any media hits in such a polarized.
It cost me everything, but here's the good news: I'm doing just fine. It won't change my life one way or another. So
that's the real. That's the real power.
That's my defect, my asset, whatever.
I had people advising me. They're like, "No, you can't make fun of him. Just lean in and go full capitalist." I'm like, I can't do it. I wish I could. Maybe I should. Maybe I'm a bad capitalist, but
no, you're not. You are the capitalist. They're the ones that are anti-capitalist. They're the ones that are leaning into central planning. So you are the capitalist. And by the way, Bridget, as you say, capitalism always wins.
I believe. All right. Well, thank you. I know you got to go. I appreciate you and love you so much.
The check-in with Bridget and Cousin Maggie can now be found at Phetasy.com. It's been titled Another Round with Bridget Phetasy, and it's now in video.
This has been Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you're welcome. the dumbest line.